In this video, we're going to take a look at the anatomy of the grasshopper. And the grasshopper we're using is commonly referred to as a lubber grasshopper. They are quite large. This one, from the tip of the head to the tip of the tail, is about 8 centimeters long. And we're going to look at the external anatomy first, and then we'll look at the internal anatomy. So as a reminder, insects, the characteristics of this group is that they have 3 major tagma. Tagma are body parts made of fused segments. And so in insects, the 3 major tagma are the head, the thorax, this is the region that bears the legs and the wings, and then the abdomen back here. So what we're going to do is walk through some of the anatomy of these different tagma, and then we'll look at the internal anatomy. So let's start with the head. So the head, one of the prominent features that we can see right here is the compound eye. Now these animals also have simple eyes. There's often one just between the antennae and a couple more up on the head in other locations. These animals have mandibles, and they use them to slice up the plant material that they eat. And if we look at some of the anatomy of the head, in addition to the compound eyes, they have 1 pair of antennae. They also have a structure right here below this frontal part of the head called the clypeus, right here. Then the labrum, just below the clypeus. And on either side, we have these small accessory appendages, the maxillae. And that's all we're going to look at in terms of the anatomy of the head. We move on to the thorax of the animal. These animals have the thorax divided into 3 subregions. They have the prothorax, mesothorax, and metathorax. So these correspond with the different walking legs that you see. So the first pair of walking legs is supported by the prothorax, the second pair of walking legs, the mesothorax, and the third pair of walking legs, the metathorax. The prothorax and part of the mesothorax are covered in grasshoppers by this structure. Looks like kind of a saddle-shaped structure. This is the pronotum. The insects also have 2 pairs of wings. There is a pair of forewings and hind wings. The forewings are supported by or attached to the mesothorax, and the hind wing is attached to the metathorax. If we come back up here onto the thorax, on the posterior part of the thorax, and when these wings are not moved out of the way, this structure is covered, but this oval structure right here is the tympanum. And the tympanum is the insect's hearing organ. This is a thin membrane. When vibrations come in, the tympanum membrane vibrates. There is an air-filled sac underneath, and then sensory cells inside that allow them to interpret or to sense those vibrations. And each of these segments right here, these little dark spots, actually are small holes. These small holes are spiracles. Spiracles are the openings into the animal's respiratory system. Inside the spiracles, there are trachea that subdivide down into tracheoles and so on, and provide oxygen to the animal. The very posterior under the body down here, we have the ovipositor, also functions as the anus. And that is the walkthrough of the external anatomy of the lubber grasshopper. Now I'll do some prep, and we'll take a look inside. All right, let's take a look at the internal anatomy of the lubber grasshopper, Romalea. So there are different ways to open up grasshoppers. My preferred way is to do a longitudinal cut along the dorsal body wall and to pull the exoskeleton back in both directions so we have a dorsal view of the internal anatomy. So let's start up here at the anterior part of the region on your left-hand side of the screen. This is the head. You can see the compound eyes on either side. So if we take a look at the internal anatomy, coming way up in here, of course the mouth is on the underside of the head, And this structure, from this kind of large sac-like structure from here to right here, this is the foregut. The foregut is lined by cuticle, and its function is to take in food from the mouth and to store it temporarily. So the esophagus is way up here. Most of this large sac-like structure is the crop, which is simply a temporary holding structure. And right here, there's a little sort of a break right here that you may be able to see between these elongate structures on the outside. But just anterior to these in here, inside next to the crop, is a structure called the proventriculus. It's hard to see with much definition in the grasshopper. But what we see is this little cross break right here, this sort of indentation on these structures indicates the transition point between the foregut and the midgut, which extends posteriorly. And the midgut includes the stomach. Now these structures, these sort of little saddle-like structures that we see extending forward onto the crop and posteriorly onto the stomach, these are the digestive ceci. As we proceed posteriorly in this region, as I mentioned before, we have the stomach in here. And in this, there's a whole bunch of kind of material that's covered by a bunch of, there's a layer of peritoneum and then a bunch of additional material on top. These are the reproductive organs up here in the posterior dorsal region of the animal's body. And right around here someplace, we have a break between the midgut that goes from about here to here, and then we have the hindgut that continues from here back. And the hindgut includes a rectum, where we have this animal creates its feces, and then the anus is terminal. It's the very posterior most structure on the animal's body. And where the midgut and hindgut come together, it's a little bit easier to see up here. You see this thread-like material? Really thin thread-like material. These are the Malpighian tubules. Malpighian tubules are insects' excretory organs. They extend up into the hemocoel, which is this large space which is now opened up, and they selectively absorb nitrogenous waste and other materials, and they deposit that material into the gut, where it goes through a process of resorbing water and other ions and materials the animal wants to keep and concentrating nitrogenous waste, changing the nitrogenous waste into uric acid. So it releases little, very, well, if you've ever kept an insect in a jar and you see it, like you go and look at it the next day, like if you've kept a butterfly or a caterpillar or something, if you look down in the bottom of the jar, what you see are little black flecks. They look almost like little grains of pepper. Those are the feces, and they're a mixture of fecal material from the digestive tract mixed with uric acid. And uric acid is moderately expensive to produce energetically, but what it allows is these animals to retain the vast majority of their water. And if you are a small animal like this and you live on land, desiccation is a real problem. So this helps them to reduce or minimize their desiccation. And so that's what all these thread-like structures are surrounding and coming out into this body cavity, the hemocoel. A couple of other things I want to point out since we have this open. If we take a look up here, see this sort of darkish oval structure? The reason it looks dark is because the wax on this dissection pan is black. This is the tympanum. This is the membrane that these animals use to sense vibrations and so that they can hear. Also, just anterior to this, these kind of brownish structures that you see, these are muscles. These muscles extend down into the legs. These are what we call extrinsic leg muscles. These are muscles that are attached down inside the leg and then come up and insert into the body wall of the animal. There are also intrinsic muscles that are found just solely inside of the leg, for example, between different neighboring articles of the leg, but these are extrinsic muscles up here. All right, so what I've done is the gonads used to be resting right in here, and I've removed those so that we can see more detail of the midgut, hindgut connection. So again, we have the foregut extending from here back to this location, digestive ceci extending both anteriorly and posteriorly from that connection point. Then we have the stomach, which makes up the midgut in this animal, coming back to this point right here. And this, you can see all these little thread-like structures. These are Malpighian tubules. This is the connection point between the midgut and the hindgut. So with the gonads removed, you can see that connection and this mass of Malpighian tubules. All right, so what I've done now is I have detached the posterior end of the digestive tract from the body wall so that we can pull it forward and out of the way. Now you can see underneath it, down along the ventral wall of the body, this whitish line right here that runs the length of the body. This is the ventral nerve cord of this animal. And it's still covered by a layer of peritoneum, so it's a little bit tough to see, but you can clearly see that this structure runs the length of the body, and there are segmental ganglia down in there, these slight little bulges that you see here and there. Again, they're a little bit tough to make out through this peritoneum, but you can see the ventral nerve cord running the length of the body. Okay, so I went in and removed the peritoneal lining of what was the hemocoel so that you can see more clearly the ventral nerve cord on these animals. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more here. You can see in the anterior part, now you can't see it in this preparation, but there is a brain, and it is dorsal, so we have supraesophageal ganglia up here. We have the three-part brain of the insect. Then there are connectives that come around either side of the gut, and then they give rise to the ventral nerve cord. Now this ventral nerve cord is actually a fused nerve cord. There are two nerve cords that are fused together, and you can see a variety of structures in here. For example, right here, this structure is a large ganglion with many neural processes coming off in this region of the body. This is the thoracic region. It's likely that this large ganglion is going to be innervating and controlling muscles associated with the legs. If we come back more posteriorly, we can see periodically slight enlargements along the way. These are segmental ganglia in the nerve cord. Now this line right here and this line right here, these are the articulation points between the ventral and dorsal plates of the exoskeleton. And that is the internal anatomy of the grasshopper.